Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I've got a collection of stories for you. Field trip, summer camp, and a bit of school as well. Turns out I didn't actually have enough exclusive field trip stories, so I hope this mix is acceptable to you. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Back in 2015 when I was 12, I went on my Year 6 reward camp. It was a place called Woodman's Point. The place is isolated in the midst of suburbia, but its surrounding bushland made it feel remote. In 1886, it was a quarantine station isolating immigrants with smallpox, the bubonic plague, and even the Spanish flu, which means that at least a few people have died there. The facility continued being used as such until '79 when it was closed. Fast forward to modern day, there is now a recreational camp that hosts many school and outdoor activities including rock climbing with an area called the Cube, with a flying fox on it. The camp had dormitories that we were split up into genders, and luckily I was placed with my friends. The camp itself was fun, and we played games with the counselors and in the bush surrounding it, built rafts on the beach and tried out the Cube in all of its glory. One night before dinner, our teachers organized a group activity where each dormitory had to find glow sticks, with the dormitory who finds the most glow sticks winning. This is where the scary begins. The group was made up of 7 or 8 students, and we were arranged with 2 looking in the front, 2 looking behind us, and the rest of us looking to the sides. That was where I was arranged. Sounds like a smart game plan, but you'd be wrong, as our group found not a single glow stick. We were walking down a path with 2 buildings on either side when the front 2 saw what they describe as a pale, skinny, naked old guy running between the buildings. No one else saw it, and we began talking and teasing the hell out of who saw it. When we were about to round the corner, the thing peeped around and looked at us. The exchange only lasted seconds, but in that time I noticed how frail it was, how it was really pale with a small mouth. I don't remember seeing eyes, just sockets. That's what I saw. Every one of us saw the same thing, and we quickly turned and ran for our teachers in fear, crying. Of course, the teachers didn't believe us, said it just being the torchlight. There was another school doing their camp, and they could have been doing activities too, but we didn't hear or see anyone. Sometimes I come across my old friends, and we still talk about it, and it was still the scariest thing we've ever seen. I have lived in a town on the East Coast my whole life. It was a small town and so everyone knew each other. My school holds around 400 students, so it's pretty small. We don't regularly get new students, but this day in sophomore year we got 2, both girls, and they were both sophomores, same as I at the time. I became friends with one of them called Casey. About a year goes by and we're juniors now in our first semester. It was announced there was a car wash in the neighborhood next to the city I lived in. The other transfer student I was not friends with was the victim. It was announced there was a car crash in the neighborhood next to the city I lived in, and the other transfer student that I hadn't been friends with was the victim. It was announced later that day that she died from her injuries. I wasn't very good friends with her, so it didn't affect me too much, at least not more than a low mood and condolences. What surprised me was that no one else was upset, not a single one of her friends, no teachers nor parents. This is where the unexplainable part comes in. I went to my guidance counselor to talk about what happened because the fact that seemingly no one cared bothered me. I asked him how he felt about the incident, and he said he hadn't seen or heard the news, but was sorry I lost a friend. I told him we weren't close, but asked if he could look up her name for me, and he told me the girl I was asking for didn't exist in the school records, but found a student who shared her last name. The student? Casey. But Casey had walked into class the very next day like it was nothing. I still never understood what happened to the other transfer student because there was no record of her whenever I searched. It's still the weirdest thing to happen to me. I went to boarding school where we weren't allowed to smoke. To make up for this, I would go out at night when it was dark and smoke there. One night, I stood behind the barracks and smoked in the distance. when I see a girl figure in a long white dress and thought, who the hell is that? I mean, we couldn't exactly call for the figure because I and the rest of the lads were hiding. If the teacher came by, we would get expelled, or at the very least be sent home for a while, which obviously isn't in anyone's best interest. But it disappeared when it got further into the woods. Me and the lads were confused. I didn't think much of it, as someone else probably going for a smoke, but to this day I still think about it, because it was like taken out of a movie. Weird as hell. And I still wonder, who would go out in the dark with a long white dress in the woods at night? Now, I don't believe in ghosts, but if I get paranoid enough, then I do. And it's one of those times that I believe it was something not human. It still creeps me out when I think about it too much. It makes no sense to me. She just walked into the woods. And I know that isn't the best way to describe it, but if you'd have seen it, you'd be left just as perplexed as I am. For my story, we need to go into a bit of very localized Scottish folklore. I went to a boarding school called Gordonstown in Scotland. The school is built in what used to be the residence of the Gordon family, who were lesser Scottish nobles. Most famously, there was a man called Sir Robert Gordon, a third baronet, who was referred to as the Wizard of Gordonston. He had an interest in alchemy and the occult, and built a round building known as Round Square, which, in local folklore from Elgin and Duffus, is believed to be the location of where he conducted his magical experiments. They say he sold his soul to a devil and built a round building so that the devil couldn't hide around the corners. One night a devil did come and attempted to claim his soul, and he trapped it in a stone in the center of the square. Eventually, at some point later, a devil came one Hallow's Eve and took his soul, and the wizard was no more. Anyway, when I was in the boarding school, my house was Round Square. We lived in the literal round house where Robert Gordon supposedly trapped a devil in the stone in the middle of it. Well, one Halloween night, me and my floor mates went to this school dance, and on our way back we were talking about the legend of the wizard. So, legend had it that if you took a rock that sat atop of the stone in the center of the square and knocked it 3 times, the devil tapped and would come out. So we tried to see who was brave enough to do it. Not because we thought a devil would come out, but because you walked in the grass in the center of the square and the seniors would beat the crap out of you. Anyway, I was the dumbass who decided to knock on the stone and nothing happened. So I ran back before the seniors could see me, and we all hung out and chatted, had some sweets and went to bed. At around 3 a.m. I woke up and was completely paralyzed. I could only move my eyes and saw the floor of my room. And then that's when I saw something. Crawling up to me, moving ever so slowly towards me, slowly making its way to my bed, climbing on the stairs at the foot and crawling on top of me. I could feel its weight on my legs, then my chest, and blowing all the air out my lungs, creeping all the way to my face where I could smell its breath and see that it was a mouth without a face. I could see its teeth, and I wanted to yell, but I couldn't even breathe, it was suffocating. Then suddenly I felt a rush of air sweep my lungs. I yelled to wake up my roommate, and as soon as I could, let out a sound. The thing was gone. I've never had an episode of sleep paralysis before or since, and I don't know if this was just a very creepy coincidence or something that I pissed off. There was a psycho in our elementary school. It was in grade 5. He lasted 5 months. My friend Matt and I recalled somehow ending up in a room with him and about 5 other kids during a normal class. This classroom was primarily used for storage. We're all talking and the conversation eventually leads to teachers we dislike. One in particular was disliked by all of us, and her name was Mrs. Paul. Eventually, Matt starts talking about how he would like to blow up her car, so he starts gathering stuff from around the room to achieve this. He grabs something that looks like the old keyboard part of a computer, one of the original ones, and gets some other kids to look for things he can attach it to, and is explaining how Part A works with Part B in order to make an explosive. Looking back, it's scary how he truly believed he could have built such a working explosive to take out the person he liked. Well, unsurprisingly to all, 2 weeks later, it was found out that he was expelled because they found him underneath Mrs. Paul's car trying to attach something underneath it. I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in bad energy and stuff. But I do believe in shadow people. Why? I've seen them. So, one of the first times I can remember seeing a shadow person was in 5th grade. I went to a pretty exclusive private school and we took a lot of field trips. Well, one trip I'll never forget. We went to the dunes of Michigan in the middle of winter. I don't know whose bright idea this was, but it was like a deserted summer camp. One of the counselors did teach us about crushing wintergreens, lifesavers, in the dark, and you could see sparks, so that was pretty cool. He did it in the woods, so it was pretty neat to see as a 5th grader. The camp was covered with snow, and as I said, was probably rocking during the summer, but at winter, eating in a dining hall made for 6 times as many children and a skeleton crew of staff was a little haunting. The place was kind of old too. The building was definitely mid-20th century and creaked and groaned. One counselor wasn't one of our teachers, it was a real counselor from the camp, and one night we had to sleep in a cabin that segregated the boys and girls. The counselor was actually a cool guy and probably smoked grass and never had a desk job in his life, so we liked him. But he assigned us bunks. I was against the wall on the back side of the cabin top bunk. There were 2 rows of bunk beds, probably 6 to a side. I was pretty stoked about having a top bunk and having the wall next to me, although the counselor was by the door in the front of the cabin, of course. This was the 80s, and no second door fire escape. He slept on the left side of the bottom bunk, which made sense being by the door and at ground level. Now this place was really far from north in Michigan, at the top of the index finger of the mitten shape of the state, but not the UP. And it was really quiet and dark. When the counselor turned off the cabin lights, there was nearly no light. The only light was from the outbuilding about 50 yards away, a typical sodium outdoor bulb. So us boys settled down and felt a bit restless, and couldn't really sleep that great, and I wasn't even sure if I fell asleep, but I looked towards the door and there it was, a shadow person. The shadow person was probably 7 feet tall, because when he started walking he had to bend down every time. He looked down to a boy. It was like he was checking on them, and then moved to the next bunk. I obviously couldn't believe what I was seeing and was totally petrified. The shadow person was moving at a leisurely rate, not fast, not slow, and only paying attention to the boy who he was checking out. As he or it got closer, I had a better look at him. He wasn't really detailed. He was static or fuzzy on the edges. Ridiculous as it may sound, he kind of looked like a stick figure, but all black as night. I could only make him out because of the light through the first 2 windows of the cabin, with the residual light from the outbuilding. As he creeped closer and closer to my bed, I was paralyzed with fear. I felt like I couldn't even say anything or move if I wanted to. A little odd too it was as though someone turned down the volume, because before you could hear the kids tossing and turning, but now it was silent. As I stated, I was on the last bed to the right side of the top bunk. The shadow man made it to the top bunk next to mine, but it seemed like an eternity as his movements were just so slow. Up until this point, everything was on the rails, checking one bed to the next, so maybe I could have explained it away, but as he checked the top of the second to the last bunk next to mine, he abruptly looked away. The way he was moving, he should have gone to the left side, second to last, to be uniform, but instead, his body/head tilted towards me. He kind of cocked his head like a dog when they're confused. He then inched closer and closer at a much slower pace, like he was sneaking on me. I assure you, my eyes were wide open. I was clinging to my itchy baby blue woolen blanket and sheet, and had them yanked up past my nose, up to my eyes, where the top of the head was. Then the shadowy man's face got closer to mine, and there was honestly nothing to make out. It was just an empty void of space, shaped like a person, but as his head approached me, I couldn't see his body any longer. At this point, I felt like 10 degrees colder. My heart was racing. I couldn't make sense of anything. I didn't know why anyone else was experiencing this. I felt like I was between the cracks and seeing something I shouldn't. The blackness of his head totally engulfed me in what seemed like an instant, and then suddenly it was morning and light outside and everyone was waking up. When I referred to this story a few times since, I called him the Sandman because it was like an entity was making sure we were asleep, but he caught me awake and knocked me out. As seniors in high school, my BFF and I spent the night in the school after everyone had packed up and gone home. My mum thought I was staying at my best friend's house and vice versa. We were the type of kids parents trusted. We camped out in the karate room because it had a secure closet shared with the band room with locking doors if things got creepy. We talked, laughed, ate sugary treats, and drank copious amounts of Jolt. The lights in the hall remained on until around 1 a.m, where they were shut off several times in a row. We started to freak out a little bit because while this went on, someone in the hall shouted loudly. The door to our room opened slowly and we quickly ran to the couch next to the secret closet. We sat there absolutely still and watched a custodian come in to start sweeping the room. He walked exactly perpendicular to where we sat and looked through us as if we weren't even there. He stared in the exact spot we were sitting but didn't notice. We ran into the closet and quietly closed the door. We struggled with going home or staying. The secure closet has an exit to the outdoors, but it was so late that neither of us would be able to justify strolling into our respective homes. We watched the same custodian, whom we'd never seen before tonight, clean the band room through the window in the closet door. He finally left and we nervously checked the windows of the doors until dawn broke. We finally thought it was a reasonable enough time to exit as classes would be starting soon. We'd headed over to the Dunkin' Donuts for a caffeinated drink and a donut. As we walked through the breezeway that separated the 9th to 10th graders from the 11th to 12th graders to stop at our lockers, we found 3 tall pink candles lit on the oversized sill, 2 hockey sticks crossed on the ground, and weird music playing from a cassette player from 1999. We booked it out of there as quickly as we could, and never saw the custodian again. This happened in the late 90s, maybe early noughties. It was probably when I was between 8 to 10 years old and in the Cub Scouts. Our troop would pretty much always go to the same campground. They had maybe 8 to 10 big cabins, and each cabin had a small kitchen, a dining area with 4 to 6 picnic tables, and a giant room with about a dozen bunk beds lined up along the 2 walls. There would be a wood-burning stove in the center. In our troop, all of the boys' dads would go camping too. The dads would take the bottom bunk, and the boys would be on top. This particular time, we got to a corner bunk closest to the front door. My best friend and his dad, a Vietnam vet and tough guy, were in the bunk over. So a little bit about me. I've always been a very shy and socially anxious person. I only ever really spoke when spoken to by an adult, and only really talked much with my best friend. This was just a one-nighter camping field trip, and after a normal day it was now bedtime. It's cold out there, so it's a fire in the stove casting a warm reddish glow around the big room, but it's still dark inside anyway. I couldn't remember if I couldn't fall asleep or if I woke up, but the point is I was awake. The whole room was dimly lit, and it was like shooting stars in a light show above the room, in the peaks and above the bunks. It looked like a massive party. I couldn't believe it. I look over at my friend to see if he's awake and he's sound asleep. I look back at the light show, and a dimly lit light swoops down and comes towards me. As it gets closer, I see a little girl's face, but with big, 2 to 3 inch black circles at her eyes. Her face is about a foot from mine, and we just stare at each other. It was kind of like the ghostly apparition that comes out of the Ark in Indiana Jones, but she didn't transform and was not menacing. I don't remember if she was floating or if I was just looking down at her on the floor as she looked up at me. I didn't do or say anything. I didn't scream or try to wake anyone. I'm not sure if I was frozen or didn't want to bother anyone, but was just very curious. And after staring at each other for a little while, I start to freak out, wondering what I should do. So I roll over, face the wall, close my eyes, and eventually get to sleep. We all left the next morning. I did not feel good, and never told anyone about it. A few years later, on another camping trip, some of the kids were talking about ghosts, and I guess there was a rumor that one of the cabins was haunted. I bet I can tell anyone for free which one it was specifically. This story happened a year ago, when I was 15 and on a school trip in San Fran. At the time, I was very immature. Not in the sense you'd normally think, but in the sense that I didn't really know how the world worked and how scary it could be. I attribute this story, and a few other scary things that happened in the past year, to me growing up and realizing how the world really works. I was roaming with 2 other girls in my room, both who were a year older than me, so I didn't really know them well. The way our trip worked, so to say, was that breakfast in the hotel was between 7 and 8, but the chaperones on the trip wouldn't wake us up, so if we wanted to have time to get ready/eat before we left to go explore the city for the day, we had to do it on our own. This meant that in the morning, me and the people in my room didn't see the chaperones till we all went down for breakfast, usually around 7:45, since we all took a long time to get ready. However, this day was different. We were tired of arriving late and having to eat quickly, so we woke up a bit earlier to go down for breakfast right when it opened. We ate breakfast with pretty much the rest of the kids on my trip, and all headed to the elevator together. This was a mixed boys/girls trip, and my twin brother also happened to be on the trip, so the people in the elevator were him and his friends, me and the girls from my room, and a few of their friends. The elevator door was almost closed when 2 Indian men stuck their hand through the door and stepped inside, squeezing themselves into an already packed elevator. They looked young, maybe 19 to 20. Eventually we arrived at our floor and all got off. So did the men. The way the hotel rooms and hallways were situated was essentially just a square. You could go anywhere around the floor and eventually make it back to the elevator if you turned left/right 3 times. The people on my trip went right and the men went left. Eventually my brother and his friends trickled off into their rooms, and it was just me and one of the girls on my trip, as the other one had went into one of the boys' rooms. We were right at our room when we encountered the men again. At first, we didn't notice anything wrong. They were probably just trying to find their room. I turned away from them and tried to find my room key and my wallet. Now at this point, my immature brain didn't notice anything wrong, but my roommate did. I could see the panic in her eyes, and as I turned to look at the men, I realized they weren't looking for a room. They were looking for us. My heart began to race, and we panicked, each fumbling for our own room cards to get into our rooms as quickly as possible. But they were moving towards us too quickly. We were standing there pressed against our door, as these 2 men stepped closer to us and got within half a foot of our faces. Their English wasn't the best, so they slowly asked what we were doing. I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to do in this situation, so my roommate spoke up. She tried her best to not let them know that this was our room,
but it was obvious at this point. She stuttered something about trying to get into her friend's room, but these men clearly weren't there to know what we were doing. I could tell they were there for something far more sinister. One of the men continued to stare at me and eye me up and down, while the other got really close to my roommate and asked for her number. She stood up taller and quickly said, "No, I'm sorry, you can't." But her voice trailed off as her confidence wore off. At last I spoke, explaining to them that we were underage, and that we were on a school trip, and that we couldn't. They didn't take no for an answer. At that point I slowly started to pull my room key from my wallet. Luckily my friend pushed the card back into my wallet, and made me push my hand holding my wallet behind my back. At that time, I was confused why she didn't let me in to go into our room, but now I realized she had more intuition about these men than I did. She knew that if we opened our room door, with them right there, they'd likely force themselves in there with us, and who knows what would happen. Eventually they backed off enough where we felt we could escape from them. She grabbed my wrist and pulled me along the hallway as we sprinted towards the elevator. Along the way, we ran into my brother and one of his friends. We quickly explained to them what happened, and they sprinted with us to the elevators. Once we were there, quickly pressing the elevator buttons to get downstairs to where our chaperones were, and we encountered the men again. I clutched onto my brother's arms, and my roommate did the same with my brother's friend's arm. They just stood on the other side of the hallway staring at us, and quickly walking towards us. It looked like they were pretending to be just normal hotel patrons in front of the boys, but we knew that they weren't just normal patrons. They were creepy, and we weren't risking it. Finally, the elevator door opened, and I didn't think I've ever pressed the closed door button so fast. Right as the men got there, the doors closed. We thought our ordeal was over, but it wasn't. There were multiple elevators in the hotel. My brother, his friend, my roommate, and me had just gotten to the breakfast hall where most of our group/chaperones were when we realized the men were there too. They had followed us. They started off staying across the room from us, but were getting closer. We left the room and went back up to our rooms. Once there, my roommate and I were panicking. They knew where our room was. They knew our floor. They could find us at any time, and we didn't know what they could do. Our panic was cut short when the phone rang in our room. At this hotel, you could call other people's rooms, and we thought it was one of the boys playing a joke. We were wrong. When we picked up the phone, it was just heavy breathing and quiet laughing. We hung up after about 20 seconds. I called my brother and his friends and asked them to meet us outside our room. They walked us to the elevators and back down the stairs. On the way, we told them about the phone call. My brother's friend took responsibility for it. My roommate believed him, but I didn't. I knew they wouldn't freak us out like that. They were just trying to calm us down. Once downstairs again, still shaking, we told one of our chaperones about the two men, and they freaked out. We told the front desk about the men, but since they didn't know which room they were in, or their names, they told us they couldn't do anything. They tried to reassure us that there was a group staying there, and that they were probably a part of it, and that they were probably leaving in a few days. But that didn't calm us down. But thankfully, we never did see them again.
One day when I was at Arabic school, my friends and I were pretty much skipping class near the bathrooms. There was a long hallway with a door that had a window in it. I was bored, so I looked down the hallway, and right behind the door was a grey figure. I got spooked and told my friends. They saw it too. But this time, the head was floating above the torso. We went back to class and told everyone. only for the lights to flicker and hear a knock at the door. When the teacher opened the door, there was no one. It was a long hallway too, so you couldn't run very easily without being spotted. After that, the door was shut, and we had to find a different class. A few years ago, me and 3 friends went to a cross-country summer camp that took place at a fancy private boarding school. I was 16 at the time, and my 3 friends were 17. We were in the same dorm room. Every 2 rooms were connected by a bathroom, so every 8 shared a bathroom. The boys were on the ground floor, and the girls, us, were upstairs. One day after our morning run, me and one of my friends, Emma, went back to our dorm. The other 2 stayed out, and so did the 4 girls in the room next to us. I know for a fact because they were all going to play soccer together, and they left their side of the bathroom door open, so I could see no one was in there. Me and Emma got changed and then sat on our beds and talked for about an hour. We then started laughing about something, and a few seconds in, I heard a deep man's voice laughing with us. I immediately stopped laughing and so did Emma. We looked at each other silently for about a minute, and I felt like I was frozen. Then I said to get lunch, or something like that, and we grabbed our stuff and left. I thought about it but was too scared to look in the closet as we left. We told my coach, he was a counsellor too, and then when we got back in, one of the women's counsellors helped us look around, but we didn't find anything. Nothing appeared to have been moved or stolen. Here's what I think happened. Our room was right next to the emergency staircase. The boys weren't allowed upstairs, so the counsellors guarded the main staircase, but not the emergency ones. We also didn't lock our doors since we were constantly going in and out. I think 1 or 2 of the boys came back from their run because everyone else thought it would be funny to sneak into the girls' room. They went up to the emergency stairs since there was no counsellors around and went into the first room they saw, which would have been ours. They probably hid in the closet and watched us change before frightening us. Creepy in several respects, to be honest. I was about 8, and it was the middle of summer. My parents had to work, but they couldn't leave us alone at home. So they put us in this daycare. The daycare, which I can't remember the name of, had been converted from one wing of an old hospital, and the rest was closed off. They were still doing renovations on our side of the building, and the 3rd floor was supposed to be off limits. Of course, when something is off limits, kids start making up theories about why that is. There were rumors that the place was haunted. A few of the older kids even claimed they'd seen some stuff. One kid even bragged that he'd snuck up to the 3rd floor and saw something in one of the bathrooms. We pressed him on it, and he said he heard someone call him from the bathroom, and when he went to investigate, it was an empty room. But he looked down the drain into one of the sinks, and a peanut popped out and started talking. At the time it sounded stupid, but enough of the younger kids were creeped out, and somehow that made me get the creeps. Well, over the next few weeks, all the kids would circulate these stories and pester the caretaker to take us upstairs to see what was there. Eventually, the renovations got to a point where it was safe to go up, though the caretaker still kept us on the 1st and 2nd floors to keep track of us. And the pestering reached new heights. They relented one day and promised to take us up after lunch. So everyone starts walking upstairs, and I'm at the back of the group with one of the caretakers, while the other 2 caretakers led the group. We get to the top of the stairs and it's pretty boring. White walls, a few doors missing, wood frames, single fan at the end of the hall that was turned on. The caretaker I was with seems confused and walks over to the fan and turns it off and unplugs it. The rest of the group began walking towards the peanut bathroom, and when I turned to start making my way there, I thought I saw someone standing in an empty room I was near. I barely caught it from the corner of my eye and snapped my attention to the room. Startled, but no one was there. After the past few weeks hearing how the place was haunted, I was thoroughly scared and ready to go back downstairs. The kids got to the bathroom and I hadn't even gotten to it myself when they started screaming and running back out. I turned around and bolted back downstairs and noticed that the fan was plugged in and turned on again. Now I have to reiterate how everyone was in front of me except for one caretaker who was standing next to me and couldn't have been the one to plug it back in, as it was at the other end of the hall. That was it for me, and I asked her to take me back downstairs. The rest of the kids had explored a little bit more, but came down pretty soon after. Not the scariest thing, but the third floor of that place cemented my belief in the paranormal. There were some smaller incidences during the week leading up to the third floor investigations. One of the rooms at the daycare was filled with large foam shapes that kids like to climb around on and make forts out of. Most of these were light enough to carry, but a few pieces were too big for anyone but the adults to move around without struggling. I remember one piece in particular was just a large rectangle. The kids were playing in that room, then decided to move to another room that had some dolls and action figures. We had one caretaker lead us there while the others stayed behind. About halfway down the hall, I hear a loud slap sound which made me jump out my skin. I was at the back of the group, and awkward, and tended to just follow the other kids. I whipped around to see that large rectangular piece sitting about a foot behind me. No one was close enough to have dragged it there, and even if they had, I would have heard them dragging it behind me. As the heaviest piece, no one could have brought it, and no one should have been able to hide in the time it took me to turn around. The other caretaker poked her head around the room with a confused look and collected the foam rectangle. The last thing I remember clearly about the place was when we were all gathered on the first floor. I'd left something on the second and asked to go up and get it. We only had one caretaker with us at the time, and she couldn't escort me up as all the other kids needed to be kept track of, so she had one of the older kids follow me up for safety. We got to the room and the light was out, but the thing I'd left was pretty close to the door, so I grabbed it. Immediately the older kid I was with screamed and began running downstairs. I looked up and saw what looked like a figure in the corner of the room and bolted. When I got downstairs, the kid was doubled over laughing and teasing me for being afraid of a coat rack. I was mad, but went on with my day. Near the end of the day, we were back on the second floor playing while waiting for parents to show up. My dad came to get me and I went back into the room to collect my things. The light was on, and there was no coat rack in the corner. I was around 12. I don't remember the date. I've always been a big childish person, partly because of a car accident when I entered medium school and felt like it stopped my growth mentally. I barely had any friends because I was going through the weird looks/bullying, and the only ones that were okay to hang out with me were younger people or of the same mindset. Every year my parents would send me to a summer camp called Lost in the Mountains, where there were basically mountain-like activities, hiking, exploring forests, etc. I live in France. I don't know how summer camps work everywhere else, but here it's basically an age classification, with there being 3 groups. The blue ones, younger, yellow medium, and green elder. I was supposed to go into the yellow group, the medium one, because I was still too young, but for some reason I got taken to the green one, composed of people that were 16 or 17, so a lot older than me, and everyone hated me for being so young and childish. The day that I remember was the last day. The instructors that were keeping an eye on us brought us to the deep spot of the forest to have a picnic, and after that they looked at us and asked who wanted to play hide and seek. Everyone was probably too old for that, but they still set things up, to which most refused to even hide. I was a kid. Of course I was excited when they just started counting, and I ran as fast as I could to a place super far they wouldn't find me. There was a smallish river. I jumped over it, and after some steps I feel a hand catching my hair very violently. I tried to turn, but the hand just slipped to my neck and caught it really tight. I was terrified and tried to fight back and resist, but the hand that was restraining me was that of a grown man with lots of strength. I began screaming at the top of my lungs. I've never screamed so loudly, but seemingly no one ever heard me, and the guy started talking while dragging me into the forest. He was completely mad and kept repeating, "You'll see. I hurt you so much you'll cry and scream even more." I remember him talking about harming me and violating me. I was 13 and I was so terrified. I've never lived any physical abuse, no hitting, nothing was more than words, and he dragged me further into the forest and I kept screaming and hitting, until at some point I found a way to bite his hand with all the strength of my jaw. He screamed back from pain and shouted that I was crazy. It's when he got it hurt enough that his arm retracted and I escaped and turned back and made the sprint of my life. I think the guy lost interest or something because he didn't chase after me. I jumped back over the river and found the only friend I'd made during camp. I kept running though. I still wasn't sure if she saw the thing that happened or if she ignored it. I went to the monitors but felt too terrified to do anything or even tell them. So I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if it was someone from the camp or a total stranger. I didn't even see his skin or the clothes he was wearing, nothing. I was just too afraid. The same night I called my parents, but they couldn't come to get me right away. I had to go back home in the bus like everyone else. What terrified me the most was that the guy could be one of the people in the same group as me. He could have just hit me in my sleep and dragged me somewhere. I still don't know, and I never want to know. All that I know is that I was terrified for the remainder of my stay there, knowing that me as a 13-year-old girl could have been in very real danger because someone had targeted me, whether they be part of the group or not, and I felt extremely vulnerable and scared for the rest of my time there. As you can imagine, I was overjoyed when it was over, and never wished to return to camp again. I went to a high school that was built years ago, maybe 200 to 300. Me and my friend noticed these hatches that were around 6 feet off the floor next to the toilets. For context, the school was based around a quad, so there was a toilet down some stairs at each corner of the quad. Obviously we had to check these hatches out, so we did during a drama lesson that we snuck out of. We got in there, and there was a corridor under the actual corridor, which is only about 4 to 5 feet tall, so we had to crawl through. The corridors connected all the toilets and their vents at the top of the walls, and there was a skirting board level in the classroom, so we could watch lessons, which was cool. There were tons of pipes and electrical wires and other non-interesting stuff like you'd expect. Apart from in one corner of the quad, the hatch for this one was locked from the inside, looked like the pipes had gone back to the wall or stopped, so the walls were bare concrete slabs rather than bricks, which was odd. There was a small gap at the bottom of the wall that I could only just fit through. It was a struggle crawling under, as we only had our mobiles and for torches, and I'm not the smallest of people. When we got through, it felt so much colder in this opening than in the other corridors. The space was far spacious as we could stand up, and also the lights from our torches didn't light up at the opposite side of the room. When we shone them, we almost made it seem like our torches weren't even on. The room smelled so bad, and we saw what looked like a decomposed cat, which was now mostly just bone and fur, next to the wall closest to us. More freaky stuff there was the stone arch above the cat. There was some red writing that wasn't in blood but was pretty creepy. It was a few years ago, but I vaguely remember it saying something along the lines of, "If you're found here, the school will expel you, but Lucifer will do much worse." There were a few scratches on the walls and some symbols that we thought were letters, but we couldn't make them out. We took some pictures and got the hell out of there. Because we were crapping bricks at this point, it was a fairly prestigious school, so expulsion was probably the scariest thing that could happen to us. This was 4 years ago now. Safe to say me and my friend never opted to return. When I was about 7, I went to a sleepaway camp. There were about 8 other people in the cabin with me, no supervision. They had set up tents near the cabin and we slept so we could grab them if we need anything. All I remember is someone screaming and yelling, "Oh my god, who is that?" From what I remember, whatever it was looked like a young girl around our age who looked up and disappeared once I made eye contact. Everyone in the morning remembered seeing it. Still not sure what the hell it was, but it scares the crap out of me still to this day. It was 2019. and my class was going on a field trip to Berlin. It was for a few days, but we still had a lot to see. One evening, my friend and I decided to explore some of the city by ourselves, which we were allowed to do as long as we were back in the hotel by 10 p.m. We went to the underground and got off. When we had been driving for about 20 minutes, as 20 minutes in the underground is a lot, which meant we were far from the hotel, we got off the train at a random station and started to go up. It looked really nice, and the first thing we saw was a fast food place. How bad could this street be? Well, when we got to the very end of the pavement, the surroundings changed like day to night. The street didn't have as much light as before and everything was darker. We still decided to walk further due to our stupid curiosity, and after some time we spotted a man. A strange-looking man. He had a hoodie on and stood up against the wall. He looked at us, but we tried to not look at him. I was the one walking closest to the wall, and I had a weird vibe about him, like he was trying to do something. So we walked this big circle around him, but as we were nearing him, he grabbed out to reach me, but didn't manage. My friend and I just started running. We looked back and he didn't follow, but still we ran as fast as we could. We went around the corner of the wall and searched on Google for the nearest underground. After some time, we were on the train heading back to the hotel. I don't know what would have happened if he'd have managed to grab me successfully, and I didn't want to find out. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you sticking around to the end of the video. It just means the world to me. Thank you so much for being here. Everyone who voted, I'd like to give a thank you. It means a lot that you guys participate in the channel every time I put up a poll and stuff like that. It's really wonderful, thank you. If your favourite topics didn't win, well, you know, I can always try and do them next time. I'll probably put up another poll in the next few days to see what we'll do next week as well. I'd like to give a huge thank you as well to my members and patrons whose names are on screen. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for your continued support of the channel. You have no idea how much it means to me. Seriously, thank you. But I think I'm going to wrap things up here, though. I'm really tired, so better get editing. Stay awesome, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.